all praises, all praises to the heavenly, holy, almighty creator of infinity, eternity, the universe, and all there is. This is Revelations.Unveiled. Detroit. Hello, family. We are back together again. We are donning our spiritual armor of truth and light and sincerity as we step forth on the battlefield to confront the wickedness and immorality of our society, of us, the chosen people, the scattered nation of the mystery of history. And so, family, with all of the public conversation and all of the public statements and the previews as it pertains to our brother Dwayne Wade, Gabrielle Union, and their son Zaya, we are confronted with this agenda of transgenderism or homosexuality or choosing or gender identity. And so, family, Brother Wade is out here giving full support for the ideas that his son is putting forth, that he is a female or he is gay or he is dealing with the gender identity issues, and he is giving this child the various options and elevating these desires so that this child may quote unquote receive some happiness or be their true self. And so, family, as the spiritual soldiers of the Most High, we must stand in the gap. We must be that voice of wisdom, of righteousness, of common sense, of critical thought, to put understanding to the family who wavers on this issue of transgenderism and homosexuality and the alphabet community practices. These are terms and actions of sexuality. These are terms of activities that are performed between consenting mature parties, supposedly of either the age of 18 and beyond. When it pertains to children, there is no conversation of sexuality. There is no gender identity issues. You are born a young boy or a young girl. You grow up and you learn and define your sex roles so that you may walk in the correct path of society. A man learning to hunt, to protect, to preserve and provide. The woman learning to nurture and mother and keep and comfort. So, family, tonight we will be reviewing, in light of tonight's theme, the Dwayne Wade transgender travesty. We will be hearing a testimony of a man who went through the transitioning process, realized the horrible mistakes after the various procedures, and is giving insight and education as to the whole demonic escapade and episode of the transgender homosexual alphabet community practice and mindset. So, family, as we have girded our spiritual armor, we dip our heads and we head forth into battle through these darts and daggers of deception and deceit, and through these arrows of arrogance, we shall become increased in our intellect and our spiritual evaluation. We shall sharpen our spiritual vision and hearing so that we can be more in tune to the agenda and be there to be the fighting force to stem that tide of satanic wickedness. And we proceed. A detransitioner in agony recounts how gender doctors manipulated him into castration and hormones. Warning: this article contains graphic details of chemical and surgical procedures performed on an individual who once identified as transgender. Descriptions also include bodily functions of adult subject matter. When Marcus Fitz started ejaculating blood, it finally occurred to him that just maybe the medical professionals he trusted had been misleading him. For several years, he said, the doctors he saw enticed him with gender transition surgery and led him to believe that being castrated was a beneficial option that would improve his overall health and well-being. Fitz, 41, is originally from the Midwest and now resides in California. He is among the rising number of people known as detransitioners, having identified as transgender for over a decade. Fitz lived a mostly stealth life and frequently lied to coworkers, neighbors, and new friends about his biological sex. Now, suffering from a host of medical complications as a result of years of hormone therapy, including phantom pain in his groin and bouts of severe depression. He is 5 years into his detransition journey and is reintegrating with his anatomically male body. At his request, he is using a pseudonym in this article with other identifying details being removed for fear of harassment. He believes it's important that people learn about the deceptive practices at gender clinics that push cross-sex hormones and transgender surgeries, which he says have left him psychologically scarred, physically mutilated, and with a severely compromised endocrine system. To verify Fitz's story, this publication corroborated his account with several people he identified who confirmed that the story he shared was truthful. The journal also reviewed medical documents and relevant court filings. Gender confusion early on. Growing up in the culturally conservative Midwest, school was always hard for Fitz, as he was frequently bullied throughout every grade. I was not the most masculine boy. I had effeminate traits, was called homophobic slurs, and this was well before the age of developing any sense of sexuality. So I grew up with this idea that gay was bad and not something that I wanted to be, he detailed. As he matured and became more aware of his sense of self and how he would carry himself, he began to see how homosexuals were mocked and that he was displaying some of those behaviors and stereotypes. Uncomfortable with his body during adolescence, the pubertal processes were never explained to him. The random erections, nocturnal emissions, and other bodily develops caused extreme self-consciousness, leading him to think he was a pervert, the kind he saw villainized in books and movies. Fitz was not raised in a religious home, calling his upbringing secular, but with good Midwestern rural values. Politically speaking, he has always leaned to the left, but considers himself an independent and not an ideological purist. It was at a public university in the Midwest in the late 1990s and early 2000s where he first heard about transgenderism, recalling a moment when he read an article in the student newspaper written by someone who said he realized that being effeminate made him a woman despite actually being psychologically male. Seizing on this, Fitz thought, "This is the answer. I'm not gay. I'm actually a woman." Thus, a relocation to the West Coast was in order so he could figure this out in an ostensibly more supportive environment. Upon graduating from college, he sold all his belongings, said goodbye to his family, and headed to California. Not long after he settled in, he went to a community-free clinic in the city where he talked to a clinician who, he would later find out, was not a licensed therapist and was serving in more of an intern role, a student volunteer. I spoke to her maybe 4 times. She was fascinated with me, Fitz said, noting his earliest memories of exploring transition. Much of what she said during those sessions was along the lines of discovering your authentic self as the opposite sex and other transgender jargon Fitz now considers to be nonsense. She ultimately referred him to a local gender clinic so he could seek medical transition, which he did. After waiting an hour at this new clinic, he had a 15-minute appointment with a registered nurse who immediately affirmed him as the opposite sex. At the end of the appointment, she prescribed him hormones. "If you think you are trans, that means you are trans," Fitz said, the nurse told him, adding that those were her exact words. Then I was given this piece of paper to sign, which had many scary things on it, and I was told not to worry about them, that they would do everything in their power to prevent them, and that this was basically a formality. The paper was an informed consent document, the journal reviewed. Fitz was prescribed estradiol and spironolactone. Estradiol is synthetic estrogen in pill form. Spironolactone is an anti-androgen, a testosterone suppressant, also in pill form. He started taking the drugs, began dressing in women's clothes part-time, and consulted pro-transgender internet resources, which he says contain all sorts of horrible advice. Further contributing to the idea that transgenderism was a glamorous pathway was the 2005 film Trans America, starring Felicity Huffman, who received a Best Actress Oscar nomination for her leading role in the movie. The movie reportedly contains a line saying that after genital surgery, not even a gynecologist will be able to tell the difference, which Fitz says is stupidly untrue. As Fitz became more serious about becoming trans, he realized that there was only one way to go: cut off all ties with family and change one's name, wardrobe, and sex marker on all his official legal documents. There is no alternative. That's just what you do, he told the journal, adding that transition is always billed as medically necessary. Within the institutions promoting the medicalization of gender, the people staffing the offices have an answer for almost every concern or objection. When Fitz expressed concerns about the ill effects the hormones might have on his liver, he said he was told, "Well, no, don't worry about that. That's why we do blood tests every 6 months." The small dose of estrogen he was given was quickly increased. He soon found himself taking 6 milligrams of estrogen. He was told up front that the spironolactone was a diuretic, which concerned him about the potential damage to his bladder, wondering if he was going to be incontinent later in life. After he started detransitioning, he was informed that the 6 milligrams of estrogen he had been prescribed was the legal maximum dose. The transgender illusion intensifies. The surgery push. This whole transgender thing became kind of intoxicating, socially and physically. It was kind of a thrill. I felt I was treated better. People were smiling at me on the street, holding doors open for me. I was getting all this positive attention, Fitz recalled. And estrogen in males, it kinds of dulls our senses, mellows us out, and it feels good. But it also made him a bit of a mess, he admitted. During his transition years, he was unemployed and underemployed a number of times, going on unemployment insurance for a single 18-month period spanning 2008 to 2010. Every time Fitz went to the clinic for an appointment, the office staff would try to sell him on the idea of surgery. He said, marketing it to him as though it was the next logical and necessary step in his journey. Every appointment began with, "How are your prescriptions? And would you like any surgery?" he said. It was like going into a restaurant and the waiter offering you the menu, he said, describing the office staff as reading from a sales script. It was an upsell. Though he didn't have benefits, when Fitz was able to work full-time, it made him feel successful, that things were at last going to work out after years of struggling. Being a free clinic, the office had a sliding scale program that was government subsidized. I would go in and they would ask, "What's your income? What's your assets?" he recalled. So if you're making nothing and you have maybe $5,000 in your checking account, you don't have to pay anything, not for the appointment, not for the pills. If you're making $10 or $15 an hour and you have $10,000 in your checking account, then maybe you have to pay $15 as a copay. But it was never very expensive at all, he said. The financial ease in which he was able to acquire drugs psychologically fed his perception that none of this was a particularly big deal and that this was, in fact, normal medicine. After one such upsell in the gender clinic in 2011, Fitz says he broke and said to them, "You're always asking me about surgery. What have you got? What are you trying to do?" He was then told about feminizing facial surgery, where they would shave down part of his brow, shave down his Adam's apple, called a chondrolaryngoplasty, and place implants in his chest and hips. They also offered the full vaginoplasty, where they remove the testicles and invert the penis to resemble a vaginal canal. Or we could just do an orchiotomy, he recalled being told. The surgery involves removing the testicles from the scrotum, but they didn't say the word testicles when they explained the procedure, he asserted. That word never was used. The gender clinic staff always avoided sex-specific biological terms, preferring genderless euphemisms instead. I was told we were removing the part that makes testosterone. I thought they were removing a tiny part of the testes, not the whole of them, he said. This was appealing to Fitz because he was informed it wouldn't change how he looked, felt, or functioned, or that it would cut down on his dependence on hormones. I thought it sounds great. It's win-win, he said, thinking this would alleviate his concerns about the wear and tear the hormonal treatment was having on his bladder and liver. Additionally, the surgery was relatively inexpensive, only $1,000, and would take only 20 minutes to perform. The doctors made it sound as though he would be getting a mole or a tooth removed, as though a tiny piece of his testicles was a bothersome, worthless piece of his anatomy that was harming him, and that the procedure was to remove it was perfectly safe and normal. He agreed to the surgery, though he asked if he should get a second opinion. He recalled being told that he did not need a second opinion and to just get a letter signed off by a urologist. Fitz called up a urologist and had a consultation with him. The urologist asked him if he was sure he wanted to proceed and if he had spoken with his doctor. The urologist signed off on it, and an appointment for surgery was scheduled for 6 weeks later in November. In 2015, when he began detransitioning, Fitz looked back at the experience and recalled being amazed at how quickly it all happened. Asked to describe what the surgery was like, Fitz recounted, "I was told to lie in a bed and my legs were placed in stirrups. Then they put you out, cut a little hole in your scrotum, and then fish your testicles out and cut them off." The surgical procedure was a much bigger deal than he was led to believe. On the day of the operation, he took public transportation to go to his surgery appointment and was surprised that they made him take off all his clothes and put on a hospital gown and a hair cap and lie on an operating table. This was no simple mole removal or tooth extraction, he would soon learn. As he was wheeled into the operating room and was surrounded by medical staff, surgical equipment, and lights, Fitz's fears mounted. I started to ask questions like, what's that? And who is this? He said. No one answered him. Right before the anesthesia drugs took effect and he became unconscious, as they had already inserted the needle in his arm, he remembered saying, "Stop!"